Here comes Honey Boo Boo. Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. If you don't know who I am Jen Insight. I talk about books and being a trans woman in America online. People watch it, they get to see the new girls that we just talked about last week. If those things, especially the girls, are something that you're interested in, feel free, subscribe, hit the bell, whatever it is all the kids are doing these days, you know, just trying to keep up with the youth. How do you do, fellow kids? And speaking of appealing to the youth, today I'm very excited to be talking about the memoir, Every Man for Himself and God Against All by Werner Herzog. For those of you who don't know who he is, Werner Herzog is a legendary German director, filmmaker, screenwriter, author, actor, and purveyor of sad beige clothes for sad beige children. You might know some of his more well-known works, such as Aguirre, The Wrath of God, Nosferatu the Vampire, Grizzly Man, and my absolute favorite Nicolas Cage movie, Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans. It's so bizarre and shouldn't work, but it does. So, watch it. If you have never seen any of those films, however, you might know him from his role on The Mandalorian, where he uttered every pet owner's favorite TikTok sound, "I'd like to see the baby." And speaking of that absolutely spot-on impression I just did of Mr. Herzog, and trust me, it is spot-on if you don't know what he sounds like, he just talks like this, and he says the most bewildering things. I listened to the audiobook. Oh my God, was it great, because Werner narrates it himself. So if you like his accent, if you are just intrigued by the way he says things, I highly, highly recommend getting the audiobook for Every Man for Himself and God Against All. It was truly a surreal experience. Now, at the top, just sort of in the interest of like, hey, how is this memoir laid out? It's not exactly like a chronological telling of his life. It's closer to little stabs of like moments in time that are attached to some sort of like hyperfixation or character. It does kind of follow a loose chronology of his life, like it starts with his early childhood growing up in post-war Bavaria and the crushing poverty that he was living in. One of the more emotionally affecting moments in the memoir is he and his siblings were crying out to their mother for food, and she finally just snapped and looked at them and said, "I would give you the meat off of my ribs if I could, but I have nothing to give you." So very bleak, so very Herzog. And the memoir is full of such sort of like portraits of these different characters, where you don't get a lot about them, but you do get what you need to understand the core of who they are, which I think is a skill that Herzog has in all of his writing, whether it be his movies or his fiction or his memoir. Speaking of characters, one of the characters in Herzog's life stands out sort of as like the second lead of this whole memoir, and that's going to be the actor Klaus Kinski. If you've never heard of Klaus Kinski, he's less of a man and more of a force of nature. He is one of the most talented actors of the 20th century, but more interestingly, he's also one of the most batshit crazy actors of the 20th century. And I don't like throwing around the word crazy too often. I myself have severe mental illness, but the stories that Herzog shares of this man will just drop your jaw at how just completely like violent and volatile this man was. Picture Hunter Thompson, but worse. And just to be so clear, I don't mean like, oh, Jared Leto method acting crazy. I mean pulling guns on your director crazy. The dynamic between Herzog and Kinski populates much of this book. It's very interesting. It's clear just how much Herzog cared about Kinski and how much he knew that he was just a troubled man. If you want to know more about their relationship, Herzog made a documentary about it called My Best Fiend. I highly recommend it, if for no other reason than the man was just wild. Sidebar here, their dynamic is actually the like foundation for one of my favorite episodes of Documentary Now that really just parodies the two of them. It's so good. Check it out. check it out. I'll link it in the description if I can, or if I can remember the name of it. Something else that stuck out to me throughout the duration of this memoir that I mentioned a little bit earlier was the hyperfixations that Herzog goes through in his life, and he focuses on quite a few over the course of the book. One such hyperfixation is ski jumping, you know, when you go down the big Solomon and just like take off, right? He gets so fascinated by it and just puts his whole spirit into learning everything he can about it, doing it, making a documentary about it. Like, this man loved documentaries and feature films, like narrative films. It's really kind of fascinating how he is a master of both of those mediums, and he talks about both quite a bit. And something that I loved that I got because I was listening to the audiobook is I just really like hearing people talk about the things that they're interested in. And when Herzog talks about things he's interested in, whether it be ski jumping or a plane crash in the Amazon, he elevates it to sort of like the status of poetry. It's really fascinating how this man just absolutely puts his heart and soul into everything he does. And I think that's so fascinating to see, especially in the year of our Lord Harambe 2024, where being really interested in things, especially things that are outside of the mainstream, are often seen as cringe. And that really drives home the point that I like to tell people of, do not cringe, kill that which inside you cringes, for to be cringe is to be free. Werner Herzog is a great example of that. Like, listening to this book went a long way in helping me romanticize my own life and sort of elevate my everyday experiences to the level of poetry as well, and to look for my heart in everything that interests me. So, needless to say, this book is quite remarkable. And I'm not overhyping this, I promise. You'll either walk away from this book not getting it at all and not getting anything out of it, or you'll get it. You'll get it. And you'll start looking for ways that you can be more Herzogian in your own life. You might even make a documentary about one of your special interests. Another thing that came across in this memoir was just the sheer daring of this man. Like, this man put himself in situations that just made me uncomfortable hearing about them and came out of them better off. There's a story in the book that I won't spoil that just absolutely made my skin crawl, my jaw drop, while he was filming a volcano documentary in North Korea. I was so moved by the story. I highly recommend it. Read this book, just read this book. And then there's just other stuff that, like, we just think of as run-of-the-mill for Herzog at this point, like solo trekking across his country for years at a time with no money and just the possessions he could carry on his back, or just delving deep into unexplored caverns and caves because he wants to film there, I guess. Like, seriously life-threatening stuff, like working with Klaus Kinski. And one of the biggest takeaways I had from this book was Werner's sort of process of creation. Now, this book is not a memoir or a self-help or a how-to in the way of Rick Rubin's The Creative Act. This is much more fluid, it's much more tied specifically to Herzog and his interests, but I think there is something there for us all to find. We see what just being interested in something can do and pursuing it with all of your available energy. That is something that I took away from this book really intensely, actually, was it's okay to be super interested in things, it's okay to get absorbed in them, and it's okay to want to do something with it. Like, be passionate. In this age where passion is sort of like frowned upon, be passionate. There is one thing that I will share from the book that really resonated with me, and this will be a good litmus test of whether or not you feel like you want to read this book, especially if you are a creative individual looking for some sort of inspiration or something to add to your tool belt. In it, he is breaking down the difference between facts and truth in art. And he says if factualness was the ultimate test of whether or not something was a great work of art, then the Manhattan Phone Book would be the greatest book of all time, because it has nothing but facts, so many of them. But then he shares that it doesn't get at the truth of things. You might know that John Smith lives on East 21st Street and that he lives on the 3rd floor of his building, but it doesn't tell you why he cries into his pillow every night. Pretty powerful stuff, especially when it is said to you like this. So, final verdict on Werner Herzog's memoir, Every Man for Himself, God Against All. Great. I think the only thing that's really holding it back is sometimes it is hard to follow because of the time jumps and the non-chronological but kind of chronological nature of the narrative. I also would have liked to have heard a little bit more about his acting experience. He touches on it briefly, but he is like really well known as an actor and director, not just The Mandalorian. He's been in other things as well. So I would have liked to see a little bit more of that. And like I said, if you can, if they're your thing, get the audiobook. The dude's voice is incredible. So there you have it, my friends. That is my review of Werner Herzog's Every Man for Himself and God Against All. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you pick it up. If you do, make sure to let me know what you think of it. You can find me these places right here, Jen_Insight on Instagram and Twitch, and Jen Insight on YouTube and TikTok. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. And yeah, I'll just give the people what they want a little bit there. And all right, catch you next time. Love ya.